Ground has been among the best types in competitive Pokemon ever since the first generation. Ground types suffer from 3 weaknesses to the common water, grass, and ice types, which sounds pretty damning. But ground types also have an incredibly valuable immunity to electric type moves. This immunity is excellent, and can be an important piece of a team's defensive core. Their weaknesses can be covered by teammates, and often those teammates appreciate a friend with electric immunity. Ground types are team players, often quite easy to slot onto builds and complement their allies. Ground typing tends to be a key ingredient to excellent dual type combinations as well, such as the famous water ground and ground flying type combinations. The ground type also has an immunity to sandstorm chip damage, which in multiple generations is an incredibly valuable trait that bolsters their defensive power even more. Ground types are also quite excellent offensively. Ground is super effective against 4 types: fire, electric, rock, and steel. These are all useful types to hit, but threatening steel types in particular is crucial, as it is the most popular defensive type in the game. Ground types also have access to Earthquake, a very solid 100 power, 100% accurate ground type attack. Flying types are completely immune to ground type attacks, but with coverage from rock or ice type moves, you can easily patch up this weak point. Ground rock and ground ice are some of the best offensive combinations in the entire game, with their widely threatening super effective damage. All these advantages have led to ground types seeing consistent use in every single generation of competitive Pokemon, and always serving important roles in these metagames. I find ground to be a pretty well balanced type, with a healthy amount of weaknesses making them targetable. They also have a modest 2 resistances to rock and poison, meaning they're quite threatened by powerful neutral damage too. Let's explore the competitive success of ground types in every generation of competitive Pokemon, and how it has evolved over the years. But first, an update. Following his newfound return to existence, Iron Mugulus has been traveling the globe and enjoying the many wonders our world has to offer. Iron Mugulus now ships worldwide, and he is available with my other merch until August 18th EST. The clock is ticking, folks. Take a look at jimothycool.com while you still can. Thank you. In Gen 1, the king of ground types is Rhydon, and this is in fact the only OU ranked ground type, which may make it seem like the ground type isn't very good here, but in fact it's mostly just because Rhydon is the perfect one, and there's not much reason to use anything else. Rhydon's ground typing makes it an elite level counter to Zapdos. Rhydon is basically the chief line of defense against Zapdos wreaking havoc. If not for Rhydon, Zapdos would be a much more prominent and powerful threat, but Rhydon totally destroys Zapdos. It's immune to electric moves, it resists flying type moves, and it threatens them with Body Slam and Rock Slide and whatever else. Stab boosted Earthquake is also very powerful here off the back of an impressive 130 base attack. Rhydon is a bit of a wall break, and this is a Pokemon that embodies the strengths of the ground type with great offensive and defensive advantages all in one. In most generations, Ground Rock is not a very good type combination because you're stacking weaknesses. Rhydon is ×4 weak to water and grass, and Rock also makes it weak to ground and fighting. But Ground Rock is a good type combo here because it provides resistances to normal and flying, which are very important. Normal especially. All the best attacks in the game are normal. Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Double Edge. Resistance to them is crucial, especially Hyper Beam. It's always scary to click Hyper Beam into a Rhydon because they will be forced to sit there charging, and Rhydon gets a free turn to attack or set up a substitute and just push the advantage. Rhydon is not the sturdiest check to things like Taurus and Snorlax because they can have special coverage such as Blizzard, Ice Beam, and Surf to threaten Rhydon, but the fact that you resist normal certainly helps in those matchups. It gives them pause about spamming normal type moves to their heart's content, and Rhydon will always feel useful to have on a team. There's also Golem, who is worth shouting out. Same exact typing, Rock and Ground, with many of the same tools. Golem has access to Explosion, which is something. It's quite good actually. Explosion can trade with key targets, and it is a very powerful tool to have. Unfortunately though, Golem is a bit worse than Rhydon. Probably usable in some contexts, but the big thing is the lower attack stat. 20 points lower than Rhydon's, meaning you're shy of important damage ranges like 2-hit KOing Chansey is a big one. You're also just less threatening to enemies like Snorlax and Slowbro and various targets. The other thing that makes Golem a little bit worse is its inferior bulk, with a lower HP stat of only base 80, while Rhydon has an impressive 105 base HP. This allows Rhydon to make high health substitutes that can withstand Seismic Toss and Nightshade, because a Rhydon substitute will have above 100 health and be able to stomach the hit. Golem cannot do this. And that's a really valuable momentum tool that can give you free turns, which are ever valuable, allowing you to click another Earthquake or get a Body Slam in there or whatever. In Gen 2, however, Golem would get the upper hand and defeat his rival, Rhydon, in the viability rankings, becoming the superior Pokemon in this world. And on top of that, there are far more viable ground types overall. Old ground types receiving new tricks, setting themselves apart a bit, and benefiting from the new type chart changes and whatnot. We've got new faces such as Steelix as well, making a splash in the competitive world. But Rhydon is one of the best ground types in Gen 2 and a very common sight in competitive play. Golem gained the new tool of Rapid Spin in this generation, which is fantastic, allowing you to get rid of spikes from the field and other effects such as Leech Seed and binding effects. The rock ground typing still feels pretty good here because of how central Snorlax is, so normal resistance is ever valuable, similar to Gen 1 in that respect. So Rapid Spin is a key tool that you have over Rhydon, as is Explosion. This was true last generation, but in Gen 2, Explosion is buffed, and it feels better to eliminate key targets like, Snorlax and Zapdos in a world where these Pokemon can now abuse Rest and Sleep Talk and be very difficult to actually nail down and eliminate. A well-timed Explosion can win you the game. Golem also has access to tools like Roar, which is great to get rid of Curse Snorlax boosts and other Curse users. You have Fire Blast for mixed coverage, which is nice in a world where Steel types now exist. Something like Skarmory is a key target to hit, who is immune to Earthquake but will be greatly threatened by a super effective Fire Blast. Forretress is also here now, who is ×4 weak to fire, so this coverage comes in handy all the time. Golem is generally a very solid Pokemon in Gen 2 and one of the most powerful rapid spinners in the format. And that ground typing is a very important part of that, in a world that is so dominated by electric types. Zapdos and Raikou are two of the most common Pokemon in the game. Electric coverage is common on enemies such as Gengar. The thing is, though, that Hidden Power now exists as a tool to give yourself whatever coverage you need, and Zapdos and Raikou often equip themselves with water or ice type coverage for this purpose, to hit ground types such as Golem. This will be a problem for the ground type moving forward, as coming straight into an electric type is no longer safe. They always carry some sort of coverage for you. And especially if that coverage is Hidden Power Water, Golem is very threatened. But the electric immunity is still useful. And against, in particular, Raikou with Hidden Power Ice, Golem is still pretty effective because Hidden Power Ice won't one-hit KO you, and you will threaten them greatly with Earthquake. They're not immune to Earthquake. Zapdos you're going to have some problems against, but as long as you can switch in and find Rapid Spin opportunities, Golem will get its value. Your rock resistance also comes in handy against the new Pokemon Tyranitar, a new rock type threat, so that's another point to consider in Golem's favor. Marowak saw a significant buff in Gen 2 after being pretty irrelevant in Gen 1 with unimpressive stats, outclassed by Rhydon. Marowak now can take advantage of the exclusive item Thick Club, which if held by a Marowak will double its attack stat. This turns Marowak into one of the most powerful wall breakers in the format and allows it to achieve incredible physical attacking damage output. Marowak also has access to Swords Dance, and it is pretty rare to actually have a good boosting move in this generation. The best special attacking boosting move is Growth, which only boosts by one stage, so Swords Dance is feeling great here. On top of your Thick Club damage, Marowak can seriously dish out some offense. Marowak does have some hurdles to overcome though. It is quite slow with only 45 base speed, meaning setting up Swords Dance can be difficult, since most things in the game will outrun you and some will threaten you. You don't have leftovers because your item slot is spent on Thick Club, meaning you lack much longevity. You got decent bulk though, you got good base defense, and you can come in on like maybe a Tyranitar Rock Slide, and there are entry points on certain things. Ground typing certainly comes in handy with rock resistance and electric immunity, but your health will be limited, so you got to use Marowak very carefully. It can be nice to paralyze enemy Pokemon to set up for Marowak so that it actually does outrun them. You could double switch Marowak in against things slower, like a Snorlax coming in or something, so that Marowak can actually outrun what's in front of it. And you can also take advantage of sleeping Pokemon for those free turns to get Marowak on the field safely and start dishing out offense. Nidoking is perhaps my favorite Pokemon in the Gen 2 OU metagame. Such a fun Pokemon to use, and pretty unique to Gen 2, where it doesn't really have such viability in any other generation. Nidoking's ground typing is part of its excellence, allowing it to stab Earthquake, which is great and very threatening, and defensive entry points against Zapdos and Raikou. Nidoking is crucially only ×2 weak to those Hidden Power types, and Hidden Power itself is a weak attack, it's only 70 power. So Nidoking can shrug off those hits well enough and take advantage of the electric types that are so central and ever present for a momentum advantage. It can put them to sleep. It can take their item with Thief, getting rid of all their leftovers healing for the remainder of the game. It can use Ice Beam to just attack them directly. And Nidoking has excellent mixed coverage for most of the metagame, with Bolt Beam here. We have Fire Blast for the Steel type. Sleep is great against anything slower, totally incapacitating it, denying it from taking action. I think that if you're one of those people who believes Gen 2 OU is a very slow-paced metagame and stall-centric, I would recommend that you give Nidoking a go, because Nidoking can speed things up and apply offensive pressure and break through those annoying defensive Pokemon that never die. You have to work for it though. You gotta game a little bit with Nidoking. It's a skillful Pokemon. You have to maneuver it in smartly, set up for it. It's not gonna one-hit KO everything, but it casts a wide net. It's got great coverage and universally threatening tools like Thief and Lovely Kiss. Very cool Pokemon overall. Although Rhydon is competing with Golem, and Golem is more generally useful and popular, Rhydon can do this kind of thing a little bit better. It is a better Pokemon at using Curse because of its superior bulk and higher attack stat of 130, making the Curse boosts a bit more worthwhile. And it also has access to Roar, which is useful alongside Curse to phase out enemy Curse sweepers like Snorlax, while you remain on the field with all your boosts intact. So Rhydon's a bit better at this kind of thing than Golem is. Steelix debuted in Generation 2, and in its debut game, it's an excellent Pokemon. Steel Ground is a fantastic typing. Steelix obviously excels in the physical defense department, resisting Snorlax's normal type attacks and even shrugging off super effective Earthquake. And purely due to the fact that it's a ground type, Steelix can also hold its own against the electric types. It would otherwise be completely destroyed by them with a low special defense stat, but with complete immunity to electric, Steelix is great against Zapdos and Raikou. Steelix can also turn defense into offense with its powerful explosion. It can trade with key targets. It can even curse up, boosting its defense to even more absurd levels. With Stab Earthquake, can pose a threat in that area as well. If you're a Steelix fan, maybe try Gen 2 OU. This is the peak of Steelix's power. It is actually quite an excellent Pokemon. And there's also Donphan, who debuted in Generation 2, one of my favorite ground types of all time. Big fan of this Pokemon. It's ranked in UUBL, not an OU mainstay, mostly because it's vastly outclassed by Golem the majority of the time, who has the valuable normal resistance. But what makes Donphan unique is its lack of ground typing, which means it's not weak to Earthquake, and it's not ×4 weak to Water. This makes it a little bit better into Raikou with HP Water than Golem is. Also makes it good against enemy Golem, because you can hit them with super effective Earthquakes. It's good against Steelix for the same purpose. You can shrug off their attacks with your high defense and hit them super effectively. So that does have some value here and there. Most of the time though, you're going to prefer Golem in Gen 2 OU. And Gen 2 OU also gave us Quagsire, a fan favorite, and the first ever water ground type, which would go on to be one of the most famous type combinations in the series. Water and ground complement each other very well, covering weaknesses, and the type only has a single weakness to grass, which is easy to patch up elsewhere on your team. Quagsire is excellent against Zapdos and Raikou, resisting, being neutral to both Hidden Power Ice and Water. For that reason alone, it has seen a significant rise over the years in popularity, and with its belly drum set pictured here, it can even operate as a win condition. With Belly Drum to maximize its attack, it can actually one-hit KO Snorlax. And in an endgame where you take out certain checks, like perhaps Skarmory, this could end things. It could secure you a victory. I really enjoy Quagsire in Gen 2. I think this is the generation where it's most fun to use. It feels pretty good in OU, in my humble opinion. In Generation 3, we saw the first ever ground-type legendary Pokemon, and this is one of the coolest legendaries in the whole series. A fan favorite. And this is a Pokemon with a universally agreed-upon pronunciation. The Pokemon is named Groudon, and Groudon is absolutely excellent. This Pokemon has the ability Drought to set permanent sun on the field. This would be nerfed post Gen 6 to be temporary sun, but just a great ability all around. Setting weather on the field, can support allies by boosting up their fire type attacks, enabling Solar Beam to function, and enabling the ability Chlorophyll and other sun synergies. Sun teams are great in Gen 3 Ubers for all those reasons, making threats like Ho-Oh and, fire coverage on Snorlax to hit steel types more powerful, things like this. It's also great because it makes Thunder only 50 accuracy. Thunder spam is common in Gen 3 Ubers because of its synergy with Rain, alongside Kyogre, but Groudon, the Pokemon named Groudon, provides Sun to nerf Thunder and shield your team from that annoying paralysis-spreading, powerful electric type attack. For this reason, Sun teams are very consistent in Gen 3 Ubers and quite high-performing. Groudon's stats are excellent, with high attack and defense being its premier advantages. Also has pretty high base speed considering the role of bulky ground type, tending to be a slower category of Pokemon. Groudon is actually pretty fast, and many sets are going to look something like this. Overheat is nice for mixed coverage boosted by the sun. This can one-hit KO Forretress, who is a common fixture of the format. Can also threaten things like Skarmory that may attempt to wall you. Hidden Power Ghost is common in Gen 3 Ubers because it's able to hit Latios super effectively. Latios being a powerful and formidable foe that is famous for its ability to check both Groudon and Kyogre, since it is immune to ground and resistant to water and electric. So for that reason, you want Hidden Power Ghost as coverage for that. For such an old legendary introduced all the way back in Gen 3, this is one of the legendaries that would age quite well. Drought is just so solid and metagame defining, something you can really build around. And the only thing that really outclassed it were new weather setters coming out. The primal form of itself outclassed the original, obviously, and of course Koraidon in the latest generation has given Groudon a run for its money as a new sun setter. But besides that, Groudon still had a decent amount of viability in Gen 9 Ubers at certain points and has been one of the most consistently great legendaries ever, and I'm a big fan of it. A simple ground typing, a lot of desirable traits, multiple ways you can use it. It's versatile, it's consistent, it's solid, it's meta defining. It is central, and it's epic. And the Pokemon being named Groudon is really symbolically apt, because it really grew on us all over the years, didn't it? In Gen 3, the ground type is one of the best types you can have. Rock resistance is even more valuable here now that Tyranitar has risen significantly to #1 Pokemon in the game. Rock coverage is common on threats like Salamence and Gyarados. And of course Aerodactyl is a formidable threat that can tear you apart if you lack a rock resistance. So the defensive value of ground typing has skyrocketed, especially because it is immune to Sandstorm, which Tyranitar creates on the field. And chief among the new ground types in competitive success would be Swampert, the best in the game. Swampert's excellent water ground typing has already shown signs of success back in Gen 2 with Quagsire, but Swampert is even better. Swampert's stats are just overall very solid. High attack, good bulk across the board, and good health. And with that excellent type combination offering little in the way of weaknesses and the ability to chip heal in the sand, Swampert is the most reliable answer to physical Tyranitar sets in the game, which is an important thing to have in Gen 3. Swampert is also very solid against Aerodactyl, physical Salamence sets, and also Metagross, since you resist Steel thanks to your water typing and hit them with super effective Earthquake. Ice Beam allows you to hit Salamence and incoming Celebi and other threats. Water Ground is nice offensively and defensively, because water and ground stab really come in handy, allowing you to actually pose a significant threat. Stab Earthquake will hit hard against all the things that hit super effectively, obviously, but also, you know, Blissey or Snorlax or whatever. Defensive Starmie, things like this. Some Stab Earthquake off the back of a respectable attack stat is going to hit quite hard. As will Stab Hydro Pump. This has high power and gets boosted by Torrent if you're brought low enough, which comes up pretty often here. And Swampert has a lot of set variety. This is a classic defensive Swampert, but you can also go in an offensive direction, running special attack, investment, and focus punch to threaten Blissey even harder. This set is also very good, Salakberry Swampert. Since Swampert is immune to Sandstorm, a Salakberry boost is not leaving you vulnerable to Sand Chip. You can use the boost safely, outrun just about everything, and hit them with Endeavor when you're at low health to bring them down to 1 HP with you after you've substituted all the way down, and trade with things. If Sand is up, they will fall to the Sandstorm damage. This can be a great way to turn Swampert into an offensive momentum generating machine and use Swampert on hyper offense teams. And of course you can lean even more into a defensive role with Swampert with a set like this. Refresh is excellent, allowing you to heal your status ailments, making you sturdier versus Toxic or Will-O-Wisp, which are common ways to wear down Swampert. You can spread Toxic yourself, and Simple Surf as your primary attack can go a long way. And Swampert has even more set variety beyond this. I have a dedicated video about Swampert in particular in Gen 3, if you want to check that out for more detailed information. It's a beautiful Pokemon that I am very fond of. Dugtrio is another central presence within Gen 3 OU. Dugtrio was underwhelming in the previous 2 generations, but with the new ability Arena Trap, it became a force to be reckoned with. This ability is banned in most generations actually. Gen 3 having this ability completely allowed is quite unique. The reason that this ability is allowed in Gen 3 is because there is a lot of counterplay to it actually. There are a lot of Pokemon immune to Arena Trap because they're floating, and the metagame skews towards floating Pokemon since they are also immune to spikes, which has its advantages itself. So even though Dugtrio will be able to eliminate important things, it is instantly punished and it loses momentum after trapping something because it requires a choice band to do do enough damage. The other thing is that Dugtrio is just shy of one-hit KOing things. You can't one-hit KO most Tyranitar sets. You can't one-hit KO Celebi, bulky Jirachi, bulky Metagross, things like this that are weak to ground and get trapped by you are just shy of getting KO'd, so for that reason, Dugtrio is not completely brain dead to use. You have to chip things into range of Dugtrio. You have to double switch it in intelligently, and you have to have the tools to recover from the momentum loss of locking into Earthquake and being punished by, you know, myriad things, Zapdos, Skarmory, Gengar, whatever. It's cool. Dugtrio being legal is something that makes Gen 3 unique. The element of trapping can create some sometimes pretty strategic gameplay, where you are hiding the fact that you have a Dugtrio in the back pocket because there's no team preview, so you can conceal information in that way, and you're just waiting for the perfect moment to strike, chipping things down into Dugtrio range to eliminate something important like Tyranitar, and with Tyranitar eliminated, you can of course clear weather or enable other threats like Jirachi to start thriving, or Snorlax. Dugtrio is also commonly seen on special offense teams because with special defense investment, Dugtrio can eliminate Blissey by surviving their Ice Beam and KOing with either Adamant Earthquake or Beat Up, which is able to 2-hit KO Blissey. Dugtrio also has a bit of an oppressive role in Gen 3 where it restricts the viability of most things weak to ground, such as, you know, Arcanine or Houndoom or Raikou, Pokemon like this that are just otherwise solid Pokemon that are very vulnerable to getting trapped by Dugtrio. But on the other hand, this can actually enable strategies like Porygon 2 exist to punish Dugtrio spam, because Porygon 2 is able to counter-trap Dugtrio, tracing its arena trap. And by eliminating Dugtrio, you can enable those powerful Pokemon like Raikou, or even just metagame staples like Tyranitar and Metagross to be more solid now that they're not worried about Dugtrio. Overall, I like what Dugtrio adds to Gen 3. I think it is part of the reason the generation feels so unique. And the ground typing, well, it serves to give you more damage on Earthquake, which allows you to KO certain things. It gives you some defensive entry points. Dugtrio is, of course, extremely frail. You're not usually switching into Dugtrio defensively, but you are immune to Electric, allowing you some gaming potential. You can come in on like a Zapdos and then bait them to HP Grass, pivot elsewhere, something like that. Or you can come in on Tyranitar's Rock Slide, live it, take like 40-ish, and then KO them if they're chipped or if they're a non-bulk invested set or something like that. So that little bit of defensive utility Dugtrio has is thanks to its ground typing. Gives it some ways to hit the field. Still not great at hitting the field reliably though. Flygon is yet another interesting ground type in Generation 3. Similar to Swampert in its defensive role as a check to the rock types Tyranitar and Aerodactyl and other physical threats with its great dragon ground typing. Although Flygon is vulnerable to ice type attacks unlike Swampert and is not as good at checking Metagross because you don't resist steel, Flygon does set itself apart with the ability Levitate, which is excellent here. Flygon is immune to ground type attacks, immune to spikes, and even immune to getting trapped by Dugtrio, which are all very valuable things. And this gives Flygon a bit of merit over Swampert. Flygon is a fixture of the Superman archetype, which is a team style in Gen 3 that aims to ignore spikes as much as possible. You just stack spike immune Pokemon. And the fact that there is Flygon here, who is a good Tyranitar check and good defensive Pokemon that ignores spikes, is part of the reason that that team style can even function at all. You really need Flygon on those teams to bring it all together and be that important piece of the puzzle. But Flygon also sees use on other teams that just want a little bit more ground immunity. Often Flygon on those kinds of teams is paired with a water type to cover the Metagross weakness and Salaman's weakness. Water types tend to be good into those two. And this is the standard Flygon set, with just enough speed to outrun Tyranitar and the rest in bulk, with Stab Earthquake being the main way to check Tyranitar offensively. There's Rock Slide for coverage and flinch chance. And Toxic, of course, to spread status, as well as protect for leftovers, chip healing. Flygon can also be an aggressive Pokemon. It's quite fast. It's got a decent base 100 attack and a good physical move pool. I suppose, with Stab Earthquake, Substitute, earn yourself some momentum here and there, a bit of status counterplay, and Hidden Power Bug for coverage to hit Celebi. This can be quite an effective threat, and a Tyranitar Aerodactyl check all at once. This is a bit harder to make work. You're quite frail without the bulk investment. Flygon usually excels defensively with all of its great defensive qualities, but this can be used occasionally, as can Choice Band Flygon. This is probably the least common way to use Flygon, but it can work. With this set, Flygon applies more immediate pressure, and funnily enough, this set uses Gust to be able to hit Heracross and Breloom super effectively. It's the best flying type option you have. I think Flygon's a very cool Pokemon and I enjoy its presence in Gen 3. It offers a lot to the right teams. Claydol, another excellent ground type in the Gen 3 metagame. Another ground type with access to Levitate, making it very good defensively. Spike immunity and sand immunity feel like having Magic Guard in Gen 3. It's just great. But Claydol has Rapid Spin. That's its real claim to fame. Claydol's probably the best Rapid Spinner in this generation. It's a Rapid Spinner immune to spikes itself, making it pretty consistent at coming in and rapid spinning things away. And it's got pretty nice defensive stats and defensive traits all around. Ground typing means it can come in on Zapdos or Jolteon and find an opportunity to rapid spin. Earthquake, Stab Earthquake, makes it pretty good at checking Tyranitar. Even though you're weak to Bug, which is an exploitable point because of your Psychic typing, you can still threaten them with Stab Earthquake and get a 2-hit KO. And with support from something else, handle Tyranitar. And your attack-invested Earthquake also makes you pretty nice against Metagross. You can hit them super effectively with good damage. You have access to Explosion too, allowing you to trade with key targets and keep momentum up as well against slower enemies, denying them a turn. Overall, just an incredibly solid and strong Pokemon in the metagame. Offers a lot to teams. It's flexible. Even if you're not playing against the Spikes build, it will have useful defensive qualities and come in handy. This is like the only generation where Claydol's any good, regrettably, but in its debut game it is a top tier defensive force. Shout out to the Camel, a fire ground type Pokemon. And one of the elite members of Gen 3 OU. Just kidding, this is a niche Pokemon, but it's a fun one. It saw some use in the Gymvitational, it props up sometimes in tournaments, which I think is epic. Thanks to your ground typing, you have good entry points against Zapdos, Jolteon, and even Gengar, who commonly uses Thunderbolt, but unlike other ground types, you have the complementary fire typing, meaning you are neutral to both ice and grass coverage. You will shrug off hidden powers from Jolteon and Zapdos, and the elemental punches from Gengar too, which are pretty low powered. Crucially, you're also immune to burn, thanks to your fire typing, making you solid against Gengar in that respect as well. Offensive fire power you can apply with Overheat or Fire Blast or Flamethrower, whatever fire move of your choosing. Dish out some damage. Earthquake, of course, for ground stab. Explosion makes you pretty good at trading with key targets. And Hidden Power to patch up your coverage, commonly grass or ice. Grass to hit incoming Swampert or other water types. Ice to hit incoming dragon types such as Salamence or Flygon. This is a very epic Pokemon that is a lot better than you would expect, exploiting common foes for an advantage. It is vulnerable to Dugtrio and doesn't stick around for very long, so you can't rely on it as a solid check to Electrics and Gengar for the entire game, but it can exploit those matchups for short-term advantages and do it pretty well, which I think is fun. And shout out once again to Donphan, who feels a bit better in Gen 3, I think. With the support of Magneton, you can actually eliminate Skarmory reliably, and with the support of Pursuit Tyranitar, you can also eliminate Gengar, allowing you to safely click Rapid Spin, and your defensive value is also enhanced in Gen 3. This is a world where rock types are of course central, so you can serve a similar purpose to those Swamperts and Flygons, as the defensive check to threats like Tyranitar, Salamence, and Aerodactyl, while also having Rapid Spin, which is great roll compression. You do need the support though of Trappers, because otherwise you get eaten alive by Skarmory, who doesn't take anything from any of your attacks and can just toxic you. Gengar also eats you alive. It's immune to ground, shrugs off HP Rock, hits you with, Will-O-Wisp, Ice Punch, Giga Drain, myriad threatening things. If you can take those two guys out, which you can with teammates like Magneton and Pursuit Tar, Donphan can thrive and be pretty good. Being mono ground also sets it apart from Claydol. Claydol is vulnerable to, crunch and bug coverage. Donphan isn't, which actually is pretty nice. Makes it way better into Tyranitar in particular. So there you go, Donphans. The Pokemon is pretty viable in Gen 3, I would say. Gen 4 saw another ground-type Uber's threat. This one not even a legendary, just a regular old Pokemon, but in Gen 4 this guy was on another level of power. Garchomp, a Pokemon that would go on to be a famous staple of competitive. A bit too powerful for its debut generation though. Dragon types, of course, got significantly buffed in Gen 4. It might be the peak of their power, with the physical special split allowing them to use physical attacks, and new options like Outrage, the newly buffed Outrage having 120 power, and of course Draco Meteor existing, pushed dragon types to absurd levels. Salamence was also banned in Gen 4 Ubers, and Garchomp alongside it. Garchomp has above base 100 speed, making it just faster than a lot of common Pokemon with the base 100 benchmark, and it's got a massive 130 attack and respectable bulk. Dragon Ground is a great type combo. We saw that with Flygon last generation, and it's the same here. You're immune to sand, you have many resistances, and even in Gen 4 Ubers, among legendary Pokemon, Garchomp is a pretty damn good and formidable foe. Crucially, it can threaten Dialga, who is weak to ground. Choice Scarf Outrage spam goes a long way. You're just faster than a lot of enemy legendaries like Palkia, so a Scarf Outrage can often spell disaster for certain teams, especially because this dual combination is a great fit in Ubers where steel types are often the only reprieve against dragon types and you threaten them too. Garchomp can also run mixed coverage like Fire Blast and Draco Meteor to threaten physically defensive Pokemon. It has a good amount of set variety too, with options such as Swords Dance and Fire Fang to hit steals, perhaps better against things like Skarmory or Bronzong. Habanberry, popular because of its dragon type damage nullification, allowing you to take a dragon type move yourself and then counterattack the enemy. Choice Band can be a powerful breaker, and you can even use Swords Dance and Salakberry to be kind of like a make your own dragon dance and turn you into a sweeping wind condition. In Gen 4 OU, Flygon got significantly buffed with its powerful new dragon type options and the new option of U-turn to reliably pivot, as well as the ground typing it already had, maintaining its excellence in a world where there's not one but two powerful sand stream setters, and rock resistance is still good, as is Stab Earthquake. The most popular Flygon set will be a Choice Scarf set. It's nice because it's a rare Choice Scarfer that not only has U-turn, a good speed tier, but also can shrug off Sandstorm damage. It's completely immune to it. Thunder Punch is nice because it lets you check Gyarados, outrunning them after a Dragon Dance and hitting them super effectively. And my favorite set on Flygon in Gen 4 is a mixed attacking set where you take advantage of Life Orb to boost up your mixed coverage. Your special attack isn't the best, but with investment, Life Orb damage for a bigger boost, and Draco Meteor's massive base power, this can hit like a damn truck. And Dragon and Ground are pretty nice stab types, hitting a lot for neutral damage, complementing each other too, because Stab Earthquake can hit the steel types trying to resist your Draco Meteor, and Fire Blast is also excellent to hit things like Skarmory, trying to resist both ground and dragon attacks. You can even use Roost to make up for the Life Orb recoil and give you a bit of longevity. It's an excellent set. This is a famous Pokemon known worldwide by the name of Hippowdon. Everybody calls him this, and he's popular everywhere. He's a hippo, he's got sand coming out of him, he creates sandstorm on the field, and this is an alternative to Tyranitar with a lot more defensive prowess. Tyranitar is more popular, of course, because it has wide coverage, it's easy to fit on teams, it has Stealth Rock, Crunch, and Pursuit, which are always useful against things like Latias and Gengar, but Hippowdon functions well as a defensive wall, with impressive defensive stats, a respectable attack stat too, and the reliable healing of Slack Off, giving Hippowdon a lot of merit. This Pokemon is a great member of slower-paced balanced teams in Gen 4, pairing well with Skarmory, who can set spikes on the field and help you out against, grass-type attacks and other such things. And Clefable. Hippo, Skarm, and Clefable are a common core that work very well together. Clefable is immune to the Sandstorm damage and can be a pretty good special wall as well, with a lot of utility up its sleeve too. I like Hippowdon. I think it's cool to have an alternative sand setter with a unique identity of its own. It sees some use in Gen 5 as well on slower paced teams, and it doesn't feel too annoying to deal with either. It's got weak special defense, it's exploitable and has clear weak points. It's also not immune to status, so that's another weak point for it, but it's also just really solid at what it does. Satisfying to use, in my opinion. And some people pronounce this guy as Hippowdon, despite the fact that he is clearly a hippo. So I don't know what's going on with that. This hippo has my respect, personally. Gliscor debuted in Generation 4, where it was ranked in OU, without even having Poison Heal yet. Poison Heal is the most iconic thing about this Pokemon, I feel, but even without it, just having Hyper Cutter here, still very solid. Ground Flying, an amazing type combination. You're completely immune to electric instead of being weak to it. You're also neutral to rock. It's wonderful, it's excellent. You got Taunt. Gliscor can be a bit of a stall breaker. It's got Sand immunity and Roost for reliable healing. You can also run Swords Dance sets on this, with Ground and Ice coverage being excellent. Even though Ice Fang is a weak attack, it does cover the weakness of Earthquake not hitting flying types. It's a pretty good Pokemon. It's not S tier or anything, but it's solid. It's a member of the metagame you gotta respect. But Gliscor would achieve new heights later, of course, when it got Poison Heal. Mamoswine exists. I talked about this guy just one video ago in my Ice type video. Also a Ground type. The ground typing is a key component of this fellow. Ground is doing all the heavy lifting, basically. Ice stinks defensively, but Ice Ground can work. You got immunities and resistances, actually. You're not weak to Stealth Rock. Ground is providing Stealth Rock resistance, which is another reason the type is actually quite solid, because it is resistant to Stealth Rock chip damage. That's another point in the favor of Ground type that I neglected to mention, but it's an important one. In Gen 4, Mamoswine is not the greatest Pokemon in the world, vulnerable to threats like Scizor, vulnerable to all the fighting coverage, and of course, doesn't have Icicle Crash yet, with Ice Fang being its best option, which regrettably makes contact and is just kind of weak. In Gen 5, Mamoswine would really come into its own, receiving Icicle Crash, benefiting from immunity to both hail and sand, and being great in the metagame full of so many dragon types with its Icicle Crash and Ice Shard hitting all of them very hard, as well as Stab Earthquake, going pretty crazy as well. What's nice about Mamoswine is that excellent offensive stab combination. Ground and Ice complement each other so well, as we've seen. One of my favorite Pokemon of all time. Big fan of Mamoswine. We love to see him. One of the coolest developments, in my opinion, in the Gen 4 OU metagame in recent years was the rise of Nidoqueen, an officially NU-ranked Pokemon that most didn't look twice at in the past. It rose up as a actually pretty nice Toxic Spikes setter and a fixture on certain balanced teams. Nidoqueen is like a B+ rank on the viability rankings or something like that, which is pretty respectable for a mostly underwhelming looking Pokemon. Poison Ground happens to be a good typing. Poison grants you immunity to Toxic, allows you to get rid of Toxic Spikes on switch-in, and Ground typing offers immunity to Thunder Wave, immunity to Sandstorm, meaning you can Chip Heal, immunity to electric moves, of course. You also resist fighting type attacks. You got Poison Point, which can spread poison even further. And you're also neutral to grass, which is useful, making you pretty good into Breloom, who is quite a problematic threat. You have the ability to spread Toxic Spikes yourself as well, which is really where the big value comes from, as does Stab Earthquake, to actually hit hard against important foes as well. Nidoqueen is epic in Gen 4. I really like it. Much better than you would expect. Actually quite common amongst high-level play. And probably the peak of Nidoqueen's success in any format was right here in Gen 4, where it is actually very strong. And Donphan, we will talk about you one last time here out of respect. Donphan is seen occasionally in Gen 4 OU for its ability to rapid spin, whilst also checking Tyranitar, similar to how it operated in Gen 3 actually. But now you got Ice Shard, which helps you against enemy Dragonite as well, and other things like Flygon and Gliscor and such. Stealth Rock, as you said, hazards on the field, a bit more roll compression there. And Donphan can also take advantage of Odor Sleuth to be able to hit ghosts and rapid spin against them. This is particularly good against Rotom. You're crucially immune to their electric type attacks, and although you might have some trouble against things like Will-O-Wisp, Hidden Power Ice, and Stab Shadow Ball, the fact that you can just Odor Sleuth and rapid spin against Rotom and you're not threatened by their electric moves at least, can sometimes be worth it against hazard stacking teams. Rapid spinning tends to not be great in Gen 4 because Rotom is so solid, and a lot of the rapid spinners like Starmie are just very easy to wear down and don't stick around very long. The power level's higher, there's high power moves everywhere. So something like a defensive Starmie doesn't feel great. And Donphan is one of the better defensive spinners that you can actually use. It feels pretty solid, it offers you a lot defensively. Ice Shard is pretty damn useful in this format, and the Odor Sleuth can come in handy too. Gen 5 introduced another Uber's level ground type, Landorus. Genie form. Landorus Theory form would not be Uber's ranked, but the Genie form has such power that it had to be contained, with the ability Sheer Force granting a 1.3 times power boost to attacks with secondary effects, and a great attack and special attack stat. Landorus can pose a real threat. Earth Power receives a significant boost from Sheer Force, as do moves like Psychic and Rock Slide. The other ability Landorus has access to, Sand Force, is also very good. Sandstorm is permanent in Gen 5, and there are 2 good sand setters to take advantage of. And in the sand, Landorus will have 1.3 times damage on ground, rock, and steel type attacks. So you get a very hard hitting Earthquake and Stone Edge. In most Ubers formats, Landorus Genie is not the best, but in its debut format, it's decent. Outrunning base 100s by a single point, making it a decent choice Scarfer, and giving you a reason to run sand in a world dominated usually by the Kyogre and Groudon Rain or Sun teams. This can outrun other Scarfers. Got the mixed coverage of Grass Knot, which hits Kyogre and Groudon for big damage, and other things like Arceus Ground very well. You got Pivoting, you got Earthquake and Stone Edge, which are boosted by Sand Force, of course. It's powerful, it's formidable, and most of all, it's funny. The Ground type is doing very well in Gen 5 OU, folks, with a lot of representatives here. As mentioned before, we got the Hippo, remaining a solid choice on more defensive sand teams. Mamoswine, now receiving Icicle Crash and just being a great fit here. And of course, Landorus Therian debuted in Gen 5. Pokemon that would become one of the most iconic competitive faces of all time. Landorus Therian has the excellent ground flying typing, the ability Intimidate, which is ever valuable, lowering the enemy's attack stat on switch-in, basically serving to enhance your bulk, nerfing enemies without having to even spend a turn doing so, and just a great set of stats, move pool options, It's got a massive attack stat, great bulk across the board, good speed, making it a good choice Scarfer. It can be offensive, defensive. It's got Stealth Rock to set hazards on the field. It's got U-turn to pivot out. It's got Knock Off to remove items, which would of course become even more powerful from Gen 6 onwards. Hidden Power Ice is common on Landorus Therian to hit enemy Landorus Therian and enemy Garchomp or Gliscor too. And of course Dragonite. This ice coverage comes in handy big time in Gen 5 OU. I will say Landorus Therian's reputation as the competitive GOAT, in my opinion, is overblown. It is a very good competitive Pokemon and a fixture of about any generation it's available in. In its debut game of Gen 5, it is not the #1 Pokemon or anything, it's just a good ground type. I don't even think it's in the GOAT conversation compared to fellas like Tyranitar and Skarmory, who are top tier multiple times throughout history and consistently excellent. Or Blissey. Even Ferrothorn, I would say, has more impact than Landorus Therian. I don't know. That's my controversial opinion here. I don't think Landorus Therian is the GOAT. I disagree. But it does have that reputation of just being damn solid in any context. It will always provide value and be a good pivot. It will check certain things. It gives you hazards and item removal and whatever you need. It even gets defog from Gen 6 onwards for that form of hazard removal. A great Pokemon all around. Garchomp is now OU ranked, more reasonable to deal with in this higher power level world. Garchomp also has the ability Rough Skin now, which is an important point because part of the reason it was so broken is because Sand Veil was so powerful on it, granting evasion in the Sandstorm. Basically, on top of how great it already was, it also dodged all your moves because Sandstorm is up in 90% of games. Sand Veil is banned in the modern day, and because Garchomp does have another ability to use, it was not caught in the crossfire of that ban this time. It's allowed to exist. And it is a staple of the format and one of the best Pokemon in Gen 5 OU. With its excellence as a Stealth Rock setter, mixed attacker with a set like this, you can also go Yachi Berry, Swords Dance, Outrage, Choice Scarf, Choice Band. It's got myriad options. I think it's fun to use. I think it's cool. It's a Shark Dragon. It's a ground type. It's got that sand immunity, that rock resistance, that electric immunity that always comes in handy. It's a Pokemon for me. Gliscor was significantly buffed in Generation 5, receiving the ability Poison Heal, which is one of the best abilities in the entire game. It means that you get healed by poison for 1/8 of your max HP instead of taking damage from it. So you can self-inflict poison with the Toxic Orb, getting incredible chip heal, more than leftovers can give you, and effectively making you immune to status, because since you're already poisoned, you can't be burned or anything else. So with that incredible form of healing, immunity to enemy status, the great ground flying typing, immunity to Sandstorm, immunity to Spikes, and all this great utility, Stealth Rock, Knock Off to remove items, Protect to just spam chip healing, Stab Earthquake is always great. Gliscor is damn good. Gliscor can also do Swords Dance. You can also get Facade, which is great. Since you're poisoned, this will have double power and be 140 power. Hits pretty damn hard, folks. So if you want to use Gliscor more aggressively, you can go with the Swords Dance set. It's an excellent Pokemon, sometimes an annoying Pokemon. A little bit hard to nail down because of how reliably it can heal, and you can't status the thing. It's also immune to Spikes damage, so kind of hard to eliminate Gliscor. It can evade justice in many contexts, but there's no doubt that it is damn powerful. Excadrill, another ground steel type Pokemon, and a pretty successful competitive Pokemon with a impressive career. Was actually banned at a point in Gen 5 because of how well it could abuse Sand Rush. They chose to ban Excadrill rather than the ability Sand Rush at that time. This was changed later though. They deemed Sand Rush to be the broken point, as Pokemon like Stoutland could abuse that to similar effect. So Sand Rush got banned instead of Excadrill himself. Now Excadrill returned, and this is the go-to rapid spinner on sand teams. Gets the Sand Force ability, granting bonus damage to its ground, rock, and steel attacks in the Sandstorm, with an impressive damage output. Has a massive 135 attack stat, impressive bulk with that base HP, good speed too. It can remove hazards from the field with rapid spin, and it's actually pretty damn threatening to common hazard setters. You think of Ferrothorn, who is neutral to ground and can actually get pretty worn down by Sand Force boosted Earthquakes that don't even make contact, so Iron Barbs will not proc. Excadrill also helps you out versus Runiclus. You can resist Psychic, come in and threaten them with Big Stab Earthquake, boosted by Sand Force. Hits hard against a lot of things, in fact. Another option on Excadrill is Mold Breaker, which allows you to ignore enemy abilities, allowing you to hit Levitators like Latios and Rotom Wash with Earthquake, which is pretty useful. Sand Force is more popular, allows you to pressure important enemies like Ferrothorn and Reuniclus, but Mold Breaker has its uses too, depending on the team. I like Excadrill personally. I think he's got a cool selection of abilities and traits, a nice typing, and a cool visual design as well. Powerful mole. I respect something like that. Gastrodon is the new best water ground type Pokemon in this metagame. Gastrodon has the ability Storm Drain, granting water immunity. You even get a special attack raise if you get hit by a water type attack. And what's great about Gastrodon is that it's also immune to sand. So you can run it on a sand team and it functions well defensively. Doesn't get affected by the chip damage. It's good defensively thanks to its nice typing with only one weakness. Can check things like Dragonite and Tyranitar. On top of that, great into the rain matchup. You're totally immune to water type attacks. Threats like Keldeo, Politoed, whatever else. Even Thundurus Therian is going to struggle because you're immune to electric. Yeah, the Pokemon's a pretty damn good fit here. It doesn't have Stealth Rock like other ground types. It doesn't have Spikes either. Doesn't have Knockoff. But it does have Scald, which is great. It can spread Burn. It's got Ice Beam, which allows you to check Dragonite and Gliscor and hit a lot of stuff super effectively, Garchomp, etc. And Toxic, good status option. Immediate healing from Recover is also pretty damn good. So despite overall average stats, not the best stat distribution, good HP stat, but everything else is unimpressive. Just fits well with all its traits that perfectly respond to a metagame centered around weather. And a lot of successful sand teams do use Gastrodon to patch up the rain matchup, and it does that job well. Another option for a similar role is Seismitoad, officially NU ranked, but you do see it sometimes. Has Water Absorb instead of Storm Drain, which heals you when hit by a water move instead of granting a special attack raise. This ability I would say is a bit better on a defensive Pokemon. Seismitoad also does have Stealth Rock, which is perhaps the main reason to use it. Has Refresh too, so it can shrug off Toxic from Politoed or whatever else tries to Toxic you. Seismitoad doesn't have Recover though, which is the big thing that makes it worse, I would say. But it's usable with its slightly different set of moves available on it, and Water Absorb, which has its uses. In Gen 6, we got the primal form of the famous Groudon, a known Pokemon. And Groudon Primal is the #1 Pokemon in Ubis in Gen 6 and 7. It is absurdly powerful. With the red orb item, you can transform into the primal form. It's a small price to pay for all the advantages you're about to receive. Desolate Land is your new ability, setting Harsh Sunlight on the field, which remains active as long as you're still on the field. As soon as you switch out, the Harsh Sunlight will fade, but whenever you're in there, it's permanent. Harsh Sunlight grants immunity to water. You'll notice that this guy's a ground fire type, times 4 weak to water, but you're immune to water, your greatest weakness, completely patched up. So for this reason, Groudon Primal's only weakness is to ground. With a single weakness, this Pokemon goes insane. Have you seen the stats on this thing as well? 180 base attack, absurd defenses, special attack 150 for the fans at home. Even as a base 90 speed, I mean, that's pretty good considering how excellent the other stats are, and boy is it versatile. You can go special attacker, defensive with Roar, like this set right here with special defense and Roar, allowing you to check things like Geomancy, Xerneas. You can go Rock Polish, boost your speed, become a damn threat, Dragon Pulse to hit Zygarde and Mega Salamence and whatever, Precipice Blades, powerful ground type attack. You can go, I mean, look at all these sets. Rest? The heck is that? Rest, Sleep Talk, just heal yourself up reliably. Thunder Wave, Swords Dance, Rock Slide, makes some sense. Lower their speed, hit them with Rock Slide flinches perhaps, Swords Dance up. That's powerful. Gen 6 and 7 Ubers center around this thing like a sun that everything orbits. I actually think it makes for a pretty fun metagame. It's not that hard to put a check to this on your team. Something like Arceus Water or Arceus Ground will be pretty solid against it. It's also pretty fun to use because it's so versatile. Feels kind of like Gen 2 Snorlax is a comparison I would make because it's on every team, but it's got a lot of set variety. It's not that hard to answer. It's just like a thing the meta centers around. Sometimes that can be okay. It doesn't exist in Gen 8 or 9, which probably for the best. I mean, we don't want Ubers to center around one thing forever, but I think it gives Gen 6 and 7 Ubers a unique identity, having this guy present, so that's cool. Gen 6 OU is full of ground types that we're already familiar with. Some things are a bit different though. Now that Sandstorm is no longer permanent, Excadrill can use Sand Rush. This ability is no longer broken in a world without permanent weather, so that's fun. More options for Excadrill, can take a more offensive role with such an ability. The new Knockoff is a great option on Landorus Therian now for dark coverage and item removal in 1. I thought that Landorus Therian got Defog in Gen 6, but that was Gen 7 actually. My mistake there. And as for new faces, we have base form Zygarde, who doesn't have any of its OP stuff yet. Does not have Zygarde complete form, big robot form that turns it into really broken legendary guy with huge stats. It just has this modest base form stat distribution, which is nothing too crazy. Also doesn't have 1000 Arrows yet, the OP move that can hit flying types and levitators. It just has these options, meaning it is not too powerful and overall outclassed by Garchomp, who has the same Dragon Ground typing and better options overall. Zygarde sets itself apart a little bit and can see some use with its Coil set, which is a boost that Garchomp does not have access to, raising attack, defense, and accuracy in a single boost, which is pretty good. A usable choice in the Gen 6 metagame. And there's also Diggersby, a normal ground type ranked in UUBL with the ability Huge Power. So this can be a pretty damn powerful wall breaker, achieving enormous attack stat. It's Big Bunny, it's funny, and boy is it a ground type. Boy is it a ground type, that's the truth of it. In Generation 7, Zygarde did become an Uber's level threat. Got the new ability Power Construct, which transforms it into the Zygarde Complete form when it reaches half health or less. And the Zygarde Complete form is of course absurdly strong. I mean, look at that huge HP stat of 216. Basically heals you up when you hit half health or less. On top of this, you got 1,000 arrows, which can hit flying types and levitators. Turns out that when you can bypass the only thing immune to ground type, it's pretty overpowered. Wouldn't you know it? Gen 7 OU is where Landorus Therian would earn its reputation as the GOAT in many players' eyes. This was the peak of Landorus Therian's power. I believe it was #1 in usage for most of the generation. Felt like this thing could do everything. It has Defog now to remove hazards. It's got Z-move abuse with Flynium Z. Swords Dance, allowing it a really strong flying type nuke. You can go defensive sets, something like this, to pivot. It's got knockoff, hazard setting, hazard removal. It's a threat, it's a defensive check to everything. Choice Scarf makes it speed control as well. Landorus Therian just feels like the most versatile and useful guy of all time that can fit on absolutely any team. So Gen 7 was where this guy earned that reputation as the GOAT. I don't know though, like I said, having one generation of excellence is not enough to be in the GOAT conversation, I would say. It's a very consistent Pokemon, but there's many consistent Pokemon throughout the year. I think that competitive Pokemon felt like it was at a new height in Gen 7, and Landorus Therian earned that reputation because of that. That would be my opinion on the matter. Gliscor and Garchomp have maintained their relevance, as we can probably expect. And a new face in the Gen 7 OU metagame in the ground type department would be Mega Swampert. This guy existed last generation, but he sucked because of a mechanical quirk with Megas. In Generation 6, when you Mega Evolve, you don't gain the speed stat of your Mega form on the first turn. You have to wait till the next turn until it kicks in. But now, in Gen 7, they changed that, so you do immediately gain the speed stat of your Mega form. Because of this quirk, back in Gen 6, the Swift Swim boost, which is the whole reason to use this guy, granting double speed in the rain, did not take effect on the first turn that you Mega Evolve. So you would Mega Evolve and still be slow like a base form Swampert for a turn. So you gotta run Protect, which stalls one of your rain turns, a disaster. They can prepare for it. You want to immediately be able to hit them. And now with that changed and Mega Swampert able to use its Swift Swim ability instantly, it became a formidable foe on rain teams. As you can probably expect from its enormous stats, 150 attack, rain boosted waterfall, earthquake for coverage, even has stealth rock, ice punch for more coverage. I would say Mega Swampert is a big part of the reason rain is such a viable strategy in Gen 7 OU. They've got this prime abuser of the weather to their name. Gen 8 OU was a quiet moment for the ground type, with only 2 ranked in OU, Garchomp and Landorus Therian as usual. Some great ground types of the past, like Excadrill, Hippo, and Mammoth, have now fallen. These 2 are still operating much the same way, but with some differences. Hidden Power no longer exists in Gen 8, it was cut from the game. So Landorus Therian cannot use Hidden Power Ice, a previous fixture of its popular sets, but probably benefited more from this, because Hidden Power Ice coverage cannot be used against Landorus Therian anymore. Garchomp also benefited from the same change. Without universal coverage options to exploit your weak point, you're a bit better defensively. You still have Toxic to hit enemy Landorus Therian, and other such fellows. Garchomp also got Scale Shot, turning it into a more formidable threat. Scale Shot can raise your speed, kind of like a make your own Dragon Dance with the Swords Dance Scale Shot set here, turning this into a potential sweeper. What a concept. Gen 9 saw the release of a new ground type, Uber's level Pokemon Ursaluna Blood Moon, a ground normal type. This powerful bear was once OU ranked, but it got banned because it is offensively ridiculous. It has a special attack stat of 135, formidable bulk, and of course the ability Mind's Eye, which is basically scrappy. Normal type attacks can hit ghosts. So with normal stab and Blood Moon, one of the stupidest moves of all time, with 140 power and 100 accuracy, and this drawback where it can't be clicked twice in a row, alongside Earth Power to hit steels and rock types that resist normal, well, this thing is frankly absurd. We know it to be true, he's smarter than the average bear, he's got a Mind's Eye inside of his skull, which of course allows him to bypass those who are no longer with us, the ghost types. It is a powerful set of traits that some say humanity should never have trifled with. And of course in Gen 9 we have many new ground-type titans released in the game. Chief among them is Great Tusk, the past paradox form of Donphan, with its ground fighting typing. Excellent stats. I mean, this bulk is absurd. The speed stat is also excellent, and all the utility you could ever want. Great Tusk has knockoff and rapid spin, which are much more sought after options here. And Great Tusk, since the beginning of Gen 9, has been the premier hazard remover for its positive matchup against defog and rapid spin blocker Goldengo, and its general excellence as a physically defensive, bulky Pokemon. It has a lot of great offensive tools. Headlong Rush is a fantastic ground stab option. Ice Spinner is great coverage. You have close combat for fighting stab as well. Great Tusk can also be more defensively leaning with a leftovers on. Stealth Rock, always useful to have. Even in a world post boots, still useful. And you can go in an aggressive direction with Great Tusk. Booster Energy will activate Protosynthesis, giving you a speed boost in this case. And with a speed boost, bulk up, and all of this coverage, as well as rapid spin, which also boosts speed now, by the way. This can be a win condition too. Many have said that Great Tusk feels like the new Landorus Therian, that bulky ground type who's good offensively and defensively, has a variety of options and fits on just about every team, and I think that that rings true for the most part. Landorus Therian is of course still here, but Great Tusk tends to be the more desirable one. Gliscor feels significantly better now. With the new terastallization mechanic, it can patch up its previous weakness to ice and abuse poison heal even more effectively with a powerful defensive typing like water or fairy or whatever. It also has spikes now, making it even better at setting hazards. It already had Stealth Rock, now they gave it spikes too. Spikes feel even better in Gen 9, so that's a significant boon. It's one of the few things that kept Toxic, which is thematically appropriate as the poison heal Pokemon, but that's a big deal in this world where even Pokemon like Blissey lost Toxic. Knock off, it still has. So Gliscor is another one of the go-to defensive ground types, not as offensively threatening and powerful as Great Tusk is, but with the poison heal, it's got more longevity, status soaking, it can even pivot with U-turn, it's got item removal, spikes. Gliscor has aged very well, and in fact feels better than ever, some have said. Iron Treads is the future paradox form of Donphan, and it is also powerful. Great Tusk is the more popular one, but Iron Treads has its value as well. A ground steel typing is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Iron Treads has pretty much outclassed Excadrill completely as the new superior ground steel type Pokemon. It is faster, it even has better coverage options, it has booster energy for that temporary speed boost, which always comes in handy. It even has Volt Switch for pivoting if you want that. And with Steel typing, it's a bit more effective against Fairy types than Great Tusk is. It's got some other defensive advantages too that Great Tusk cannot achieve. Not as good against King Gambit, vulnerable to Dark type damage, but certainly a worthy presence in the metagame. Ting-Lu, a new legendary, a member of the Ruinous Quartet, and another powerful, bulky ground type. The bulk of this thing is ridiculous, with 155 base HP. Excellent defense, and while it has a low special defense stat, the ability Vessel of Ruin will nerf the enemy's special attack, resulting in special bulk in that sense. Ting-Lu has access to spikes to leverage its bulk for a long-term advantage. It's got Stab Earthquake. Ting-Lu's options are pretty limited though. It doesn't have stuff like Knockoff or Toxic. It doesn't have Recover or anything crazy. Its sheer bulk makes it very powerful and worth using, but it is notably pretty passive and easy to respond to. Despite looking pretty ridiculous on the surface, it is very limited in its actual options. Makes it feel balanced in my opinion. And then of course we have the titans of the past. Landorus Therian, I have to give a lot of respect for clinging on to its OU position despite being heavily nerfed in the new generation. Landorus Therian no longer has Knockoff, Defog, or Toxic. Hidden Power it obviously lost last gen, so Landorus Therian significantly nerfed. And there's new ground types to try and take its spot. Great Tusk is the new kid on the block with Knockoff and Rapid Spin to remove hazards, positive matchup into Goldengo, and stuff like this. There's also Gliscor, who has the same typing, ground flying, also has pivoting and hazards, but is immune to status, has all this longevity. But Landorus Therian, still worth using. Partially because it actually matches up well against Great Tusk, with its access to Intimidate and the option of Grass Knot, which hits Great Tusk super effectively. Intimidate is more immediate defensive value, if that makes sense. Gliscor can be kind of passive. Aggressive teams can take advantage of Gliscor. Landorus Therian will directly lower their attack and is a bit more proactive as a pivot than Gliscor is. It's more offensively threatening. Great Tusk cannot pivot. So Landorus Therian is kind of like some mix between Great Tusk and Gliscor. It's somewhere in between there with offensive pressure, pivoting, but no hazard removal. What's nice about Landorus Therian is it also matches up pretty well into King Gambit, intimidating them, lowering their attack, and you can hit them with Earth Power. Landorus Therian tending to opt for special attacks in this generation just because they hit the stuff it needs to hit harder, such as King Gambit, who has a high defense stat, and Great Tusk also has a high defense stat. Many thought that Landorus Therian might drop to UU in this generation finally, but it didn't happen like that. It didn't. The same cannot be said for Garchomp though, unfortunately. A once Uber's level threat and a titan of competitive Pokemon for generations is now ranked in UUBL. Actually fell down to UU due to poor usage and was living there for a bit, got banned from there, too powerful for UU, but not good enough to be OU anymore. Garchomp is in the limbo state. It's not completely terrible. It has good stats still, a unique typing compared to others, and options like a Dragon Tail. It also gained spikes, but with all the other powerful ground types at your disposal in Gen 9, Great Tusk, Gliscor, Landorus Therian, Iron Treads, Garchomp feels a little bit lacking compared to all of them. Certainly doesn't help that Ice Spinner has risen as a coverage option on Great Tusk, mostly for Landorus Therian, but Garchomp gets caught in that crossfire too. And it doesn't offer that much compared to its other ground type counterparts. The best thing it has going for it is Rough Skin, the ability, which you can stack with Rocky Helmet to rack up quite a lot of passive damage on contact. But other than that, Garchomp is no longer an offensive powerhouse. Before, in Gen 4 of course, it was an Uber's level offensive threat with its powerful Outrage. But Dragon typing is no longer what it once was, and Garchomp has regrettably fallen down. Something that nobody ever thought would happen. Garchomp seemed like one of those evergreen Pokemon that would be good forever. But sometimes things change, and that's the way of the world. And that does it for my overview of the ground type, one of competitive Pokemon's most consistently high-performing types, and one of my favorite types in the game, perhaps my second favorite behind Fire. Like I said in the intro, I tend to think it's a pretty balanced type that is powerful but not, too overbearing or crazy, and it's a type with some of the coolest Pokemon in the whole franchise to its name. My favorite, of course, being Mamoswine, who is also my favorite ice type. I'm a Mamoswine fan, but who is your favorite ground type, folks? Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you for watching, as always.